Okay, so again, this is what we thought the best thing to do is to really open it up for you to lead the conversation. If you won't lead the conversation, we'll lead it. I mean, we can steer it, if you ask us to. But let me open it up and maybe just raise your hand if you have a question, a thought, a direction you want to take the conversation, and let's see if it works this way. So who's going to be the brave first person to raise their hand with a question or a comment? Or yes, Avram.
So I suppose I have a philosophical question. Thanks. My question is, how do I know when I need to use introspection in order to solve a philosophical problem rather than induction? How do I know that I have enough material to think about, and when I need to collect more data? And
can you give an example?
Yes, so famously, at least in objectivist circles, Ayn Rand is known to have discovered the process of concept formation by introspecting, following up a certain question that she was posed. And it just, within 40 minutes, she came up with the answer. And I wonder, when I think about philosophical problems, when should I try and just put more brain power, just more concentrated effort, and when should I start and look for examples and then try to generalize from those?
Okay, yeah, so when it comes to the issue of concept formation, the way Ayn Rand explained this was, I think she came up with the basic structure or the basic key to how we form concepts by just thinking about, well, how do I form concepts? If I'm trying to form a new concept about something, what is it that I do with my mind? And she has had a view about that, but what she had to do then was not just introspect, but to actually test out, does this actually work for pronouns? For example, is it really true that you identify a number of things, you grasp the similarities between them, identify, a commensurate characteristic that you can kind of place them on a range of sort of more and less and integrate them and stuff. Can you do that with of and but, and things like that? And so she actually had to look at a whole range of different concepts and sort of test them out. And does this theory really hold water? So it wasn't simply introspection. How do you know whether you can? I think there's too much of it. Is it? Do I solve it by introspection, or do I solve it by sort of looking at the world or looking at other people or whatever it is? I think it's rare that you solve something only by introspection, because you have to also think about your own life and how it's like. So just take an issue of am I in love or something like that? It's, there's introspection. Like, how do I feel about this person? How is this just I really, everybody has the teenage years, right? So do I just really, really like her, or do I love her? And it's you haven't really made a firm differentiation between those two, because you haven't really experienced a feeling of romantic love for someone. It's and you just feel an intense emotion. So the introspection is important, but then you have to also look at well, what do people look like when they're in love? Talk to other people. Is this really what this is like? Talk to your siblings or your brother. I mean, I had an older brother, so that was lucky. But you have to look at the world. You have to see what's been said about it, see what other people think about it. But there's also, in the end, you have to think, yeah, but what am I experiencing on the inside? So I think it's rare that a problem is solved only by introspection. And when it comes to the concept formation, she had to go then test a lot of different concepts to find out whether her view held water. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Because I don't think it's a dividing line with, here's how you know it's this versus that. It's usually both.
Think about it as a scientist you can start with a rationalization of here's my theory. It has to start with observation. It has to start with what can I bring to the lab, my own introspective lab, as material to digest or try to. And a lot of the time, people that are emotionalistic will start with an emotion as a primary. Oh, I just don't feel like doing anything today, right? So they will start with that. So I think, and unfortunately, even with objectivists, a lot of the times, they build castles in the air, right? Where you go back to where's the root of all of this? And if you read Understanding Objectivism, Dr. Leonard Peikoff talks a lot about this disease in in us intellectual beings, where we don't ground our starting points in reality. And so a lot of that is, I completely agree with what Aaron said. It's don't ponder about what love is or try to read about it in books. Go out on a date and then come back home. It's like, how did I feel? Am I excited? Goosebumps, and so on and so forth. Yes.
But there is the other option that you already have the data, but you're just being too empiricistic in your approach, and you just have to just...
Yeah, so that's where you need the other part, which you need, and that's what people don't know to do. I think most of the people out there intrinsically know how to experience and then glance over like, okay, that felt good. That's good. That girl I like. Why? How does that compare to something else? And so on. That's where the depth is lacking. That's where they don't go to the lab. And just think about our culture of the ability to go home and sit in silence for 15 minutes and write something on a blank piece of paper saying, do I love her?
I did that in high school.
Oh, yeah. Good for you. And people don't do that. They ask other people. They go, I don't know, just never think about it. They just glance over it. It's like, yeah, I think I love her. Maybe I'll ask her on another date, and then maybe I'll marry her. But never take the time to slowly digest and peel one layer at a time. Like, why do I love her? What is my emotional response all about? What are really my other girlfriend? Do they have something in common that I can identify? There's so many questions. I show that every time when I do the happiness team. I start with like, this is how I feel, and I think I know why I feel it. And like 15 minutes later, it's a completely different story. I didn't understand what am I feeling and why it was that I felt it. And a whole new world of possibilities opens up, and a whole world of mistakes I could have made. Luckily, I'm not going to make more of those mistakes because I don't lead by feeling. I took it back to the lab, and I really examined the essence of where it comes from.
And let me say one more thing. On another philosophical problem, which you might think, what you do is you introspect. So Ayn Rand has a view that the primary evidence that you have free will is introspective. It's your own observation of exerting the effort of awareness, exerting the effort to take control of your thinking, of the direction of your thinking, and so on, and the choice of your goals, and it's something you can experience directly. That's your primary awareness of that. If you had no awareness on this, there would be no issue of free will. It would never come up. There would never be a problem of free will. There would be no observable phenomenon that you would then have to try to conceptualize or have a viewpoint about. So that is your primary evidence, but it's not the only evidence, and you don't stop there because you need to have a theory of free will. So if you're a philosopher, if you're a regular person, you're like, yeah, I need to control my thinking. If I don't, I just sort of drift around and nothing comes of it. I have to like, oh, well, what am I doing? And I have to take the reins. That's, I think, enough largely for most people. But if you're a philosopher and you think about, I need to have a theory of free will, you don't go then back to introspection unless you're trying to like differentiate between complex, mental states. But you have to then integrate that with a theory of causality. So what you're saying is free will is a form of causation. It's a form of enacting effect. And so, well, how does causation or cause and effect work outside in the world? And how does that fit? Is this a new form of causation? Is there some way in which they're all fundamentally the same? And then, so you have to integrate the introspective with the extrospective.
I have another example of a mode of inquiry which I compare to what Rand did with concepts and with the example of free will, and that's Dr. Peikoff's writing on the philosophy of history. So he went through thorough studies of many different aspects of politics and science and culture, and only then did he came up with the integration that he presents in the dim hypothesis and in the ominous parallels. And so I'm wondering, when is that kind of mode suitable, and when is a more integrating yet more introspective mode
It depends on what.
adequate?
Yeah. So let me have this the last one, and then we'll come back, and then we'll come back. So or we'll go out. We'll extrospect, and then we'll come back to you. You have to ask where do you need to look for the data, and what's the problem you're trying to solve. In some cases, there's no one answer to the question. So in some cases, in order to solve the problem, in order to find the truth on something, you actually need to look outside, and in some cases you need to introspect, and there's no one answer to it. It just depends. What are you looking for? What are you trying to find? What do you need to know in order to solve the problem? So.
Any other questions
Okay, we'll just keep handing this back.
about anything?
So my question is about values. What is the method for someone to find the root behind the likes and don't likes? So I get it that you should get at the root, but how exactly is one should do it?
You're asking how does one do it, or how should they do it? Because I think we do it all the time. So I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're asking how do we form values?
I want to get behind the root or the meaning of the concrete things that I like and
Okay.
that I
got
know
it.
that I like, and how do I get behind? How do I follow it to the root?
I call it the value formation theory. No, but let me give you my perspective. When I ask people who are you, they get really confused because they usually give you the demographics, right? This is how old I am, this is where I live, I have 2 kids, and that's what I do. And then you're like, yeah, but you didn't answer my question. Who are you? And I think after thinking about it a lot, you realize that the only way to say who's Aaron in a way is to describe the way Aaron responds to things in reality. He's the guy that likes philosophy. He's the guy that is in love with Isabel. He's the guy who likes to cook. He's the guy who loves working at ARI, I hope. He's the guy that enjoys, I don't know.
Stuff.
Yeah, stuff.
Many things.
So now I know Aaron. So pay attention, this is really important. I mean, the only way to really know him is to know the things he responds to. In a way, that's the reflection of the nature of his consciousness in reality. The stuff that he finds meaningful. So that's first. I mean, that's my starting point. Okay, so in order to know myself, I need to pay attention to what resonates with me. And that's where the process starts. Again, going back to introspection. So you go out and you live, right? And you bring back home, it's like, wow, that was really fun, or that person was really interesting, or that book was amazing, or that movie, or that kind of work. And then you try to extract as much value as you can from that experience by learning more about what it is that you loved. And again, as I said, I don't know if you heard my story about, I came back from a sale. I was selling software, right? So I come back from the sales, and I was like, wow, that sales was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I love sales, and I love software, right? And on Friday night, I said, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but something's wrong. So I introspected, and I said, why is that sale what was so meaningful about closing that deal? And I said, it's the size of the deal. I said, no, I closed bigger deals. It was the fact that I did it on my own. It was not a team effort. It's not, no, I closed many deals. And then what was so unique about this deal? And I realized that what was unique about this deal is that they asked me not to demo the software, not to do anything about the software because they saw all the demos. It was me presenting to 15 salespeople why I think they should be working with our software just as a presentation. So I prepared a really funny presentation about how lovely the life of someone who uses my software will be versus how miserable it will be by using the Microsoft version of the competitor. And they laughed and they nodded. I hit all the right points. I basically got to present to them. And it was very conceptual. I mean, it was a story. And then it hit me that the reason why it resonated with me so much is that I got to stand on stage, like I do now, and talk about ideas and stories, which I love putting together. And suddenly I was like, so it's true. I don't like software. I don't like sales. I like storytelling, and I like ideas, and I like presenting, which actually correlated with all of my experience from since I was 6 years old, telling stories in my class, waiting for Friday, 10 a.m. I remember the Batya, the teacher allowed me to tell stories. It's like everything clicked. And I basically came with the opposite output from that introspection. So how do you identify? So first, it's an experience. And the second thing is do this deep introspection, like what was good about it. I created a tool called the Value Galaxy, which is you put all the good things in your life. And then you ask yourself the question is, what is the common denominator of all of those things? Can I find common denominators that I call value themes? And that really sheds a kind of a light on the things you love. So the process that I recommend, go out and live. Direct your actions towards things you know are more likely to be resonating with you. It's like, I like to work with people versus I like to work on my own. That's a big question. You start there when you're very young, because you don't know, right? You're discovering the world. And then slowly direct your life towards the things and try to extract as much information out of those experiences by introspecting.
So, to give a concrete example, so when I was very young, I loved my grandmother telling me stories about the heroic battles of Greeks. So we're always like 300 versus a million. So you've got this version in 15 different battles throughout history. But I found this super exciting. Then when I was around 10, I remember I was very much into basketball, but I didn't support the strongest team that would win easily. I was supporting the team that was behind in every game, and then they would make a push towards the end and shoot some heroic three-point shots, and then maybe they lost in the last shot, but they made that effort. And I remember going to school the next day, and it's like, why isn't everyone excited with this? Did you see what happened last night? That was like brilliant. And then let's say I read the Atlas Shrugged. It's like, oh, okay, this goes back to people doing deeds that are great, that are larger than life, and deeds that require effort, and what we'd call heroic deeds. So that's how you identify it. First, you identified how does it make you feel. Let me give you a counter example. When I was working that super boring, not boring, but unfulfilling job at the university, I read one of these books that says, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be super productive. I'm like, okay, I'm sold. I did it for this. But it's like, why am I doing this? And my then girlfriend tells me, like, why do you wake so early to work when you don't even like your job? I was like, oh, you're right. So it's like I'm trying to persuade myself that this university job is such a value that I have to wake up at 5. So in a way, I was a rationalist, as we say philosophically. And then you're kind of subconscious, don't know how even to do. The feedback you get from your emotions is, what are you doing? What's the point of that? You don't enjoy it. You don't contribute anything to anyone, to yourself, or to whatever. So don't do it. Wake up at like 8, 9 o'clock and go to work, because that's what you do. So that's how I think you form your values, by getting feedback, but not just following this feedback blindly. As Tal said, try to understand it and try and connect the dots and find themes, like ancient battles, basketball, novel heroes. Oh, okay, I see. There's a trend here. There's a theme here.
Let's do this. I'll say one more thing about that is that some of your values are going to be easier to recognize, and some of them are very difficult. So I love food and cuisine. I don't know a lot about wine, but one of the things that was helpful was just figuring out what I actually do like about wine. So there's something very simple. So it's like if I start to think like, what is it that I like about this? So I don't like that, but I like this one. So I really don't know much, but it was just sort of like, okay, I don't like when the wine is sweet. Okay, so the opposite of sweet is dry. Okay, so I like dry wine. Okay, there you go. I got one thing, right? I like when there's fruit, but not a lot of ripe fruit, because it makes it kind of jammy and a little lean sweet a little bit. So it has something that has some balance. And so what the trick is, you have to identify and articulate what it is about X, whatever it is, that you do like. And some of maybe the wine, that's easier, maybe it's harder for some people. But when it comes to things like, why do you like chamber music? like string quartets. And so I love string quartets. I love chamber music. And sometimes that's a little harder. So I don't know. I really, really like that. And it's like I really like her. It's hard to articulate. But you can do it. I like the intimacy of it. Like there's no big orchestra with a big timpani and stuff. It's a very intimate setting. There are only 4 voices, in a string quartet. They're usually complex, unless it's Tchaikovsky. So anyway, but they're usually complex, and so I like the complexity of it. But it's not just that they're complex, like they're just difficult. They're complex in a way that it's interwoven. And I remember thinking there's so much for the mind to do, but it's not a cerebral sort of experience. It's an emotional experience. But you feel like you're in a world, and so it's like you have to articulate it though. And I think that's one of the things. And you write it down if it helps, but you have to try to actually identify what it is that you like, and put it in words. And some things that's easy, sometimes something that's hard. Is there some particular thing that you were grappling with?
Not something specific, but would you say that all the processes that you described belong in something like differentiation and integration? Like this is something I like, not like this, not like this, not like this, not like this, and it's like all these other things that I found along the way.
There's a lot of that happening. Again, one of the things I want to make sure that it's thought and action. And I always say this, don't forget, a lot of it is just do, because we tend to over-rationalize by sitting in our sofa and planning the word we need to live. No, you have to apply yourself. And so first, I want to emphasize that. But yes, when you're bringing the data back home, it's a process of differentiation and integration. It's like less of this, more of that. And I agree with Aaron, there's a lot of things that are very hard to differentiate. Very hard to differentiate. Because sometimes you like it, and some of you don't, especially with people. Think about how hard it is to differentiate what you like about someone and what you don't like, because sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're not, and the context changes. So, yeah, some things are very hard to differentiate, but I agree with you. I think it's differentiation and integration. And the more truths you can verbalize about yourself, the more self-knowledge you have. And what I do in the happiness team many times is like, wait, if you know that about yourself, what else can you value? And that is value, initiative, I don't know how to call it, which is actually coming up with things that you didn't try before that you could try because you know something about yourself. I give this stupid example where I say, look, I like racing, I love philosophy, and I love management, and I love to coach. What if I did a philosophy-based coaching workshop in a racetrack? My hair stands when I think of that. I mean, that's so dense with value for me that I would do that for free every day. So that is, in a way, projecting, to the future, something I could, knowing things about myself. So, yeah, that's. Anything to add, or we're good? Yes, Gilad.
So I was born here in Israel to two loving parents, grew up in a nice neighborhood, in a relatively free country, and I'm wondering how should I feel towards all the benefits of the circumstances that brought me into existence.
Why are you asking yourself this question to begin with? Why should you feel something about it?
It for sure comes up a lot in discussions. Yesterday I was in the Freedom Con, and I was talking to somebody, explaining to him about the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and speaking about how my life is about myself, and everything every decision that I'm taking is going to be in how is it serving me, how is it benefiting my life. And he was like, wait, what about everything else? Yeah. Like it's not only you. There are circumstances, and you can easily acknowledge that because you read books about people growing up in the Holocaust. So how should I feel towards these circumstances, and what should I also reply to people?
How do you feel? Forget how should you feel. How do you feel? Does it, put it this way, does that kind of question or that kind of response from the other person, does that trigger in you a feeling also, or at least a small feeling, a big feeling, whatever, of, yeah, maybe I owe some of this to, I don't know, my privileged background or whatever it is, and so maybe I shouldn't take credit for A, B, and C. Does it have a tug on you? Because if it does, I mean, I have something to say for that, but is that what's motivating this?
So it's definitely not making me feel that that like it takes out of my achievements in life or anything. Not that there's so many achievements so far, but it doesn't make me feel that way. But it does make me feel happy that I got all of this, and I'm wondering if that joy of the benefits of the circumstances should translate to some sort of gratitude or commitment to the society.
Depends.
Yeah, I want to say something because I love when Rand says check your premises, right? Think about the premise of this question. Where is it coming from? That's why I asked you, why are you asking this question? The premise of this question is that somebody else is responsible for your happiness. Somebody else contributed to where you are today, not you. And that I reject that premise. You're a man of self-made soul. My response to that other guy is like, yeah, my parents decided to have me. It was their decision. I don't have to be thankful because they decided to do it. I had nothing to do with it. They took good care of me, right? So good for them. And I'm grateful that you didn't starve me to death. But they're not responsible for you, and they didn't do much, I would say. Just maybe when it really depends on your educational environment as a toddler and things. I do think that matters a lot. But you were the one who taught yourself to be you. You are responsible for it. So go all the way with the response to that person to say, no, it's all me. Look at twins, being raised in the same parents, same environment, same everything. One, it goes and builds an amazing life, and the other one does nothing with themselves. How do you explain that? Same genes, same environment, it's self-made. You are the one programming your own mind. And so the premise, I always try to go to the premise of the question. They're trying to find something that is outside of you, that dictates, the privilege, where you were born. It has nothing to do with it. I was born in Shchunat Dalet, Beersheva. We had a car that didn't work, very little food, and I was happy. A happy person. I didn't get good education by any standards. It was a public third grade school. Here I am. How do you explain that miracle? Right? People just make up deterministic premises that are completely false, and all of us are buying it. I think the fact that you're even considering answering him is, in a way, a recognition of some kind of a deterministic cause and effect. It's not. You have free will in the middle, which is you. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah, but I also think it's okay to acknowledge it in the sense, like, you wouldn't say, no, that had nothing whatsoever to do with anything. Well, it certainly did. I mean, if you were born in a dump with abusive parents that were psychologically abused you growing up, yeah, that matters. My parents didn't do that. I mean, I had to listen to country music, but beyond that, it was just I had a pretty decent childhood.
That's abuse. I mean,
I know. Ouch. There should be a law. No, but the thing is, you can acknowledge it and say, yeah, I was fortunate to grow up in a better environment. That's true. But what are you supposed to do with that? What are you supposed to do with that is you have to start wherever your starting point is and build something from it.
You can argue, you can even argue that it's harder to build something when you're born on a hill in Beverly Hills with super rich parents, super successful, self-made and all of that, and you're born to this amazing mansion. What do? Right? Think about how hard it is to have that kind of starting point. People don't talk about it. I was born in Shchunat Dalet, Beersheva. I had nothing. basically, I can take credit for everything that got me out of Shchuna Dalet Be'er Sheva and you know, but just so I'm trying to take the opposite. It's irrelevant from this. I mean, from the starting point, as far as like, oh, now my life is all figured out because I have money and a silver spoon in my mouth. So I agree with Aaron. It's not like it had nothing to do with that. You don't want abusive parents, but always lean on the free will side and the self-made soul. I think term that I think is really true.
But I want to add something to the question. And that I watched a movie about this happiness coach, another happiness coach called Tony Robbins, and he asks the audience about their stories, and many of them share horrible stories about abusive parents and stuff like that. And he tries to convince them that they should be grateful for those bad situations because that's what made them who they are. So I assume that objectivists will say, reject that completely. No, if people have been assholes to you, you should resent them, and you know, it shouldn't be the focus of your life, but like you should, you know, not be grateful for that. So you should feel something to the circumstances, and I'm asking that again. How should I feel?
You should.
It's not the center of my life, my feelings towards society, but well, like.
Yeah. So take the stereotypical Hollywood teen movie with the bully and a guy who is bullied and then learns martial arts. Could you say that it's the bully who made him learn martial arts? At the end of the day, no. Because many kids are bullied, or adults are bullied, and they don't learn how to defend themselves. So even when someone is the trigger, the bully, you take the decision then to say, oh, I'm going to do something about it. That's the first thing. The other thing is, I would add the element of justice here. So for example, I feel very grateful to my parents. So I try now to actually give back. I don't think they had the duty, as you said, to do it, but I want to acknowledge, look, you've helped me so much. I was abroad for so many years. I felt the love. I felt that here there was a welcoming place. So now I try to, quote, give back, but I do it with my heart because I think it's an act of justice. And the third thing is in terms of how you should feel. So you had a good upbringing and all that stuff. If someone would stand here and say, look, my life is going nowhere, I'm a loser, and I blame my parents, we'd all agree, come on, this is not a way to go through life. You should only blame yourself if your life is not going anywhere. So if we reverse this and we say, look, my parents helped me to have a good life, still at the end of the day, it's up to you. So in the same way as we should take extreme ownership and saying, no, if my life is going nowhere, it's on me, it's not on my parents, it's also the opposite. If your life is going well, or if you have self-esteem and you have goals and stuff, it's on you at the end of the day. So let's use the same standards to someone who is using excuses with someone who has unearned guilt or doubt.
Right. And I don't think you should think about it in terms of how should I feel.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to come back to. Yeah, I agree.
Well, again, you have a premise there. I should feel like, do you think there's like someone at the outside of Gilad that has a standard that if you abide by that standard, you're right? And no, there's no should. How do you feel? That's why I think Aaron asked you, how do you feel?
And the thing is,
I'm interested. Do you have an emotional, when I tell you, how do you feel about your parents? What kind of emotion comes out? Gratitude? Or?
No, yeah, towards my parents, it's an easier question than
and about your environment, society. What do you feel about, when I tell you, how do you feel about the society you grew up in?
Who is even society?
Like
the teacher, the friends.
Exactly. You have to be concrete, and I would say I don't feel anything about. I mean, about my teacher Batya, I love her. About Bet Sefer Nitzanim, that was horrible. I mean, it really depends. So you should, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, just at a completely unphilosophical, just straightforward ways, like how do I feel about the fact that I grew up in America with loving parents who had incomes, you know? Well, I feel fortunate, and it's good. I don't experience an emotion, but if you ask me to say, like, what do you think about that as a starting point, I said, well, I'm lucky to have started like that. That's a good thing. If somebody says, well, see, you got a leg up, and I would say, yeah.
So?
Yeah, but so what's the point? Are you going to say that I didn't do what I did? You can be parents of millionaires, and you're in the exact same position that I was. What do I want? What kind of a person am I going to be? Am I going to put forward the effort to do something with my life or not? Am I going to figure out what it means to be a good person, or am I going to wind up, a bad person with a bad character and a bad life? And in that respect, I don't think you're any better off from that perspective. What you do is, if you're wealthy and you're in a more free country, you have more opportunities. You have more available resources for opportunities that are not always open to other people. So yeah, but I'm not going to feel guilty for that. Those are values. Why would I feel guilty for starting off with more values, like around me, than other people? That's a boon. That's a good thing. You shouldn't go, oh man, I wish I was born in a dump. Then I could be a self-made man. That's crazy. And it's just as crazy as like thinking, I think, I don't know what this Robbins guy was on about, but it was like, no, you don't thank the bully for,
There's elements of altruism there all over the place. But I want to say something about the fact that you chose to ask the question. It's a non-important question. And if I have to say something for you, is regard it as non-important. Because then you can figure out what's important. And what's important is what you made out of your life and how you're going to live your life. So if somebody comes at you with this, one of the things that I think differentiates people who succeed more is that they identify really quickly what's not important. Because most of the stuff in the world doesn't matter. If you heard my lecture yesterday, I was basically claiming, let's say that the world becomes an laissez-faire heaven out there. Right now, I how do you say? Snap my finger, and all the regulations are out. Everybody's perfect. Your life didn't change a bit. You still have to build a life, right? And so what's really important is to build your life. The political question is way less important, unless somebody really forces you into a cell or something where you cannot live a life. But as long as you're free, the most strategic question is, who am I? What do I love? What am I going to do about it? Yeah. Basically. And so when somebody asks you a question like that, the first thing I should do, it's a non-important question. So I just wanted you to take that, because if it bothers you, it means that you have an emotional attachment to that question for, I think, a wrong reason.
I want to come back to that, because you said that it's an unimportant question. But it's important to you, right? So it's like you can't ignore the fact, and you can't ignore the fact that it is important. It has some sort of pull. It seems to be important. So the question is, ask yourself, is it important? If so, why? Do I think it's important? If so, why? And is that a good argument? Like, are there good reasons to think that this is an important question to ask myself or to be concerned with? And if there are, what are those reasons? And maybe you've got something, right? But maybe you don't. So I think that's worth digging into. Why this seems so important to answer and to address, and
One last thing on the parents issue and all that stuff, and that's something which is very concrete and personal to your life. So, for example, one could say, Nikos, your mother is a communist, or they're altruist, so you should, No, that doesn't work like that. In the context of my life, they have been good. So I recognize the good from the bad, and I try to do justice to the good and get value from the good. So it's not like someone is going to give me a rule on how to deal with my...
How should I feel about my mother?
Having said that, anyway, that's it's a can of worms, how it's called, the whole family thing and how we should deal. So
no, but just to end it, I just want to say, what I would take from it is ask yourself, why is this important to me? And you'll find maybe things like, which I had to do for years, is I care too much about what people think about me, or about or about what they think in general. For instance, that could be a hypothesis of why you're carrying that from yesterday, right? And I said, let's get to the question, the root of the question, why do I carry with me other people, what bothers other people, right? So for instance, I'll give you an example. Somebody made a comment during a dinner that we had in our house, right? Never mind, it's too personal. But they made a comment, and it really hurt me. And I walked for days hurt from a casual comment. And it was not only until I really took an hour and replayed what he said and replayed my emotional response that I realized I was so wrong about my emotional response to it, that I identified something I really had to work on to really root out of my subconscious and my automatized responses, because I knew it's plaguing a lot of, like, doing a lot of harm in many areas of my life. So if you have an emotional response to something, like I said before, try to get out as much, including why is it important.
And also, last thing everybody's, and also, no, you can counter. And also but it's important also because the emotion also might be right in the sense that, like, if you that comment at the dinner or whatever, it's because often these things sting because they hit an element that's true.
Right.
And once you get past the sort of the hurt and the resentment or whatever it is you feel because somebody made you feel that, it's like, yeah, that was kind of nasty, but they said something that has an element of truth to it. Yeah, maybe I am a little bit like that, and that kind of hurt because it was true a little bit. Yeah. Maybe not fully, but, and then, okay, that's worth thinking about, so it's worth being attuned to that. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I find myself more interested lately in the Israeli-Palestinian argument.
Conflict,
yeah. And as I get more involved, I ask myself, what would Ayn Rand think, and what would she do? Because, well, it's complicated. And also I find myself feeling it's some kind of a follow-up question, because I feel responsible, or I feel like I should do something for another person. I'm not sure if it gives me benefit, or so I would like to know it's like some kind of a general question.
What exactly do you feel you need to do to compensate, or to?
In some way, I need to feel sorry, like.
Don't start with emotions. Don't start with emotions. You have to think about, like, what did I feel? I feel this. What should I feel? I feel a little this. Who cares that? What do you think about the situation? Start there. What do you think about the conflict? What do you think about the issue of justice as it relates to these things? What do you think about the types of societies that are at odds with each other, about their basic nature of these societies? Which would you support if you had to come down to it? Which do you think is a better society, and by what standards? And so because you can look at this issue from what is a better type of society, in terms of its structure, the way the laws are, the way it works, the way the discrimination works. We just look at the whole range of things. It's like, which is the better society, by what standard, and why? And to have a view about that. I think you should have a view about that. And then it's also, if there are elements of justice and injustice, first step back to a wider perspective is, what does justice look like in this society in general? And what does justice look like in this society in general? If there are specific injustices, what's your view about that? And you could say, yeah, I think that was unjust, but I think this was unjust too. And so that but it's what do you think about it first? Don't let the emotions lead. It's right to acknowledge, yeah, I feel kind of a little guilty about this, or I feel like I just feel like this pressure to do something, and I'm, but it's acknowledge that, but that shouldn't lead where you're going with what do I, it shouldn't go, I feel like this, what's the action I should take? It's step back out of that and say, but what do I think about this? And to get clearer on that, to think about, oh, okay, so this is just collective guilt that I'm suffering from, not in action isn't warranted. Or it's, yeah, if I'm a person that takes justice seriously, I should be doing something because I have a perspective now on where injustice lies and what to do about it. And that, the thinking should guide, I think, the feelings and the actions. But
I couldn't agree more. And I think that I give a concrete, I voted Meretz for many years, feeling guilty because I was born in a very left-leaning kibbutz. And when I started thinking about politics from an objectivist perspective, I really realized that the real question is really what kind of society I think is better morally. I suddenly had a standard to judge that the Israeli society is superior to the Palestinian society because it's more hospitable to humans, and we are just and they are not, and they want to kill us and we don't want to kill them, and all kinds of things like that. And then my emotional responses completely reversed to the point where I feel the opposite. So taking what Aaron said to the extreme is the thinking process basically trained my subconscious mind to feel or emote in a completely different way. So I would take his advice to go and study. For instance, what I would do is read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, to really understand what capitalism is, what does it mean to have a free society, and why Israel is a much freer society than, I don't know, how do you call the other, the Palestinian society, or what? The Palestinian Authority, and the foundations of those societies, and have a view on how to judge those. And suddenly you will understand why we have the conflict, who's the right side, who's in the wrong, and maybe your feelings will change. So it's really about starting with studying and understanding. It's complicated. I mean, politics is complicated, but that's how I would lead, with really learning more about it.
One of the problems when we think about politics these days, or about any issue, is that we tend to think very much in what I call tribalistically, which means there are two sides, I have to pick a side. See, for example, what happened with, the issue of the vaccines. Some people, because they don't like Biden, they said, oh, whatever the CDC is telling me is wrong. This is a bad way to go through life because it's very, in a way, oppressing to your mind. Because you cannot judge for yourself. You have to go with whatever the group says. The other problem with this is that you have to pick a side as whatever the side is doing is good, whatever the side is doing is bad. And this doesn't allow you to think and say, okay, how do I judge every single detail to have my own mind? So in a way, thinking independently about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is even liberating, because you can say, the big picture here is that I think this side is the more moral side. However, if you ask me, what about these refugees in, let's say, 48 who lost their house and they were peaceful but they were kicked out? And you say, that's an injustice. So thinking for yourself is kind of this relieving thing that, okay, now I can see the world in a clear way. No one is forcing me to view the things in a particular way. And my mind is now free to make sense of the world. And it's very, very liberating when you break this chains that I have to feel this particular way. And even with objectivism, and even with people who consider themselves independent thinkers, you can fall in this trap. Let's say, oh, Leonard Peikoff says we should do this with Iran. He said this in 2001. Therefore, now in 2022, I have to say the same thing. No, I might disagree. I might come with a different conclusion. And this is perfectly fine. And this is beautiful and liberating. So that's the way to make sense of a conflict. How do you judge it? Based on some particular principles, not on how you should be supposed to judge it.
And collective guilt is a very dangerous thing. You are not responsible for anything before, but except what you do. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I wasn't really referring to collective guilt, but also, I mean, you talked about, forgot the word in English.
Tribalistic? Tribal or?
Yeah, but like there isn't any, like it's not black and white. You need to judge every single element. But for one side, it's like this, and the other side, what makes logic sense would be another thing. So someone also who is goes by Ayn Rand's philosophy can say that the logic thing isn't what seems logic to me.
Exactly, and we disagree even with each other. We disagree with each other quite often on things regarding to politics. So, for example, who is the bigger evil, Trump or Biden? We might, even within let's say, the group, we might disagree, but we agree on the principles. But we are never.
If we didn't, it'd be kind of freaky.
Yeah. So the black and white thing is very interesting. So the principles are black and white,
Yes.
but then how do they apply in a case? That is not very, very clear. So, for example, breaching individual rights is bad. But who is breaching individual rights more, the one side or the other side? It's a matter of it's difficult to figure it out, it's difficult to measure it, and it's also difficult to measure what you consider worse or more dangerous. So let's say, do I consider worse January 6th than the attack on the Capitol or the riots of the BLM in the summer? We might agree on the facts, we might agree on the principles, and yet we might disagree on how we interpret these principles. So there's no problem at all if people who share the same values disagree on a concrete, even if this concrete is quite big, as for example, I don't know, should the West Bank have its own authority or not? Because people might apply these principles in a different way.
Thank you.
Yep.
In the back.
I'll speak up.
Okay.
You mentioned.
It's for the camera, so we still need the mic. Yeah.
Hello.
Now you don't have to speak up.
You mentioned agreeing about the facts. So about objective truth or factual truth, as Popper would say, via relativism that is now rampant in the U.S. and about, let's say, the political correctness and all these narratives, which, by the way, there's a fallacy, a logical fallacy, which somebody coined is a politically correct logical fallacy. It's actually fallacious in logical thinking. Anyway, I was wondering what your opinions are about this thing that is going on in U.S. and also around the Western world, which actually is bringing us closer to a collectivist, to authoritarian way of living, and it's a danger to freedom, to democracy, to stuff like that. And the big tech also is part of it, because information and who controls information is a big part of what we agree on as facts. Because, for instance, January 6th, I don't know if most people know all the facts, because big tech and the media portrays things in very certain. So agreeing on the facts is a big issue. And I think Naomi Wolf calls it fascism with a smile about what we're undergoing. So people will think it's for their own good, and we're being good people by being politically correct, but they don't realize that it's a slippery slope, and also we're going on a very dangerous path. So I wanted to ask what you think about it, and how can we resist this?
Oh, sorry. Nikos. Yeah. You want to start?
Okay, I can start. So I wrote a whole book on this, which is a book on tribalism. So the way I see it is this, that what happens more and more is that we put on a pair of glasses and we say whatever is my team is doing is good, whatever the other team is doing is bad. And this distorts our thinking. This, for example, you can have the same situation, and when one side does it, it's good. Let me give an example. Do you remember when Obama went to Cuba to meet Raul Castro? What the Republicans, the conservatives said, this is treason. This is horrible. He gives them his sanction. This should never happen. 2 years later, Trump goes and meets Kim Jong-un. The same people, they say, this is 4D chess. This is genius. This is like he's the new Clausewitz. So, same thing, different criteria, because what changes is who does what. And the problem with this, and that also relates to political correctness, is again, it stops you from seeing the world in a clear way. So, for example, when you are supposed to think in a particular way, it's what Ayn Rand calls evasion. That I see very well that, okay, these people in the summer of 2020, they are rioting. They're literally fire there. But when I'm supposed to say, no, this is peaceful protest, I have to override my mind, which is destructive. So anything that has to do with overriding what I see, reality, there's one reality. There's not my truth and your truth. So when someone is forcing me, or not forcing me like with a gun, but with pressure, to say that I view the world in a particular way, this is bad. Let's make, though, the distinction between forcing with a gun and forcing through pressure. So it sucks if you have to lose your job or your friends or get off Twitter because you don't write Black Lives Matter. But I wouldn't call it fascism, because fascism is something very specific, and it's when coercion enters the scheme. Coercion is something completely different. Coercion is, I'm going to literally force you to view the world. It basically says your mind doesn't matter. You think, for example, that this is a riot, it doesn't matter. I force you to see it in a different way. So the atmosphere of tribalism and of political correctness sucks. But it's not fascism, because we have to maintain this distinction. Is force and coercion being used, or is it the culture, pressure, whatever? And that's why I would be a bit careful with how I deal with the issue of big tech. So, for example, Trump being kicked off Twitter. I disagreed with Twitter. A lot of our colleagues found it a good move and a moral move. I disagreed. I thought it's not a good move. However, I will go to the barricades for Twitter's right to do so, because it's a private entity. So that's why we have to be very, very careful on what are the terms we use. Because then conservatives says, look, if this is fascism, we have to stop it. We have to stop fascism, right? Therefore, we need to force Twitter to bring back Trump, because we don't want the fascism of big tech. So I think this is a slippery slope. I mean, both could be slippery slopes. But we have to be very careful not to be so angry with what the one side is doing, so that we lose our judgment and we betray our principles and our values in terms of sticking it to the side that we dislike so much.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple of things. One, just about that, is that I think many news sources have, because of their actions, and the constant slanting, to put it lightly, have discredited themselves in many respects. But I think it's not. I think the solution, or what you're trying to reach is objectivity, where you know the facts sufficiently to be able to form an accurate judgment of what happens. I don't think, I don't listen to MSM. Once you put MSM, you've tribalized it.
That's mainstream media.
Oh, sorry, mainstream media, the usual sources, MSM. So nothing's in there is true? There's no accurate reporting in there, there are no facts in there, and then it's sort of like, what it says is, but then what one winds up doing often is, I'm going to find the newest source I can trust. And it usually the one you most agree with, the stuff coming out of it. And I think you need to read more widely. I'm not you personally, but I'm just saying one needs to read more widely as to if you're actually trying to get a sense of what you're trying to understand an event, like the January 6th or whatever, and you're being serious about it. Like, you should look at some of the sources that, typically skew left, and you should read some of the sources, like Fox News in America. They skew right. They tend to be more pro-Trump and so on. And read what kind of reporting has been done on the subject. And you get a wider perspective and and a better ability to detect where it looks like, notice how they completely didn't say a word about this, and these people are making a big deal out of it, but it's part of it. You need to get a wide array of facts. And part of the difficulty, and this is inherent in trying to be objective, is it's not always easy to determine the facts. And that's just a fact that one has to accept. But you have to know where you are in that process. So you can say, well, the New York Times has been really pushing on this aspect of it, and the conservative news sources are still making a big deal of this and downplaying that. And okay, so what do I know about this? What do I actually know about the situation? and what can I infer reasonably? And there's no sort of shortcut to that. And it makes it, unfortunately, there's a lot of non-objectivity in journalism, sadly. But there still is some good journalism, but that's just an unfortunate position we're in. Now, the second point I was going to make about relativism. Relativism about truth. There's a sense in which you could say what it amounts to is there's no such thing as truth. But usually what the relativism means is truth is relative to an individual or to a group. So there's only true for you or true for your group, but there's no true with a capital T, so to speak. There's no real truth. There's no objective truth. So relativism is a rejection of objectivity. But that's been a long-standing philosophical problem since ancient Greece. I mean, so the issue is how do you form an accurate picture of the facts? It's about the relationship of consciousness to existence or mind to world, and that's a complicated problem. But I mean, obviously, objectivism's perspective is objectivism rejects relativism, but part of it is because it has a perspective on what reason is, how reason functions, and how you gather facts and what logic is, and so it's. But so relativism is a problem for sure. Because what it does is if the relativists are right, they're also right to say that there's no such thing as objectivity. But if they're right that there's no such thing as objectivity, they can't hang on to that claim that there's no such thing as objectivity. So there's a certain kind of self-refuting, respect in which it's self-refuting. All truth is relative. That's an absolute. Is that truth relative? Just for you? Because it isn't for me. You know, so there's a philosophical problem with that, but you can't dismiss it with a quip. But it's, yeah. So.
I just want to say something. I'm a person who joined the Ayn Rand Institute, and I live among philosophers. And one of the things I've learned to appreciate is how complicated things are. I mean, you come with like, oh, the left is so bad, right? And they're distorting everything. And suddenly you hear Onkar or someone analyze like, well, it's much more complicated than that because the right is really distorting things and the left is actually saying the truth about some things. And so think about it going to trial for simple things, like a couple about their divorce talking about the same thing that happened from two different perspectives, like it's two different worlds, right? And it takes 2 years to figure out who's right, just about a couple fighting over something.
Johnny Depp.
That's ridiculous. But anyway, objectivity is hard. I mean, really hard to get to. So.
We're having a lot of fun doing this. So in the Ayn Rand University, we have a module called the Road to Critical Race Theory. So we take all the ideas of the New Left from the Frankfurt School to postmodernists to feminists, still critical race theory. But we try to judge them objectively. See, what is the merit? So we try to steel-man it. So this is what I said to our friend earlier. Trying to think independently, it's very liberating. So we're like, oh, look, turns out, for example, the anti-racists are very correct here. This is a big injustice. So you break this chain that has to say that everything that comes from the left is bad and everything. So it's almost, I would say, an intellectually liberating experience to form your own judgment and say, okay, again, this is a good, this is a bad point. They have a point there, but then the way they try to solve it is bad, or they're completely bad here. So it's a nice way to go through life, independent thinking.
You know what? I want to give you another example because I find it shocking. So here we are. So we are in a salon together, somebody's house, and Onkar is giving, just starting the evening, and he's talking about Black Lives Matter, right? So what do you think about Black Lives Matter? Are they good? It's like, no, it's a racist, And he starts with like, let's think about what's right about Black Lives Matter. And he makes a whole point about the fact that America never really reckoned with its slavery problem in history, right? And he gives a whole historical account about why America didn't really reckon with its problematic history with slavery. It had slavery. And some people walking around with a Confederate flag still waving it, knowing that some of what it means is I want to go back to those eras of time where we had slavery. This is what the South stood for, right? And so he started with the opposite angle that shocked me to realize that they have a point. I mean, what they're saying is, you didn't convince us yet that, this way of thinking is out of the social context. And until we feel like we got rid of this, we will continue to say this country is based on racism. So, and that was a real revelation for me, because like, you know what, that's true. So suddenly you can at least understand that there is some logical ground for them to, and you can, and that I think is the how hard it is to really unpack things in politics, because the unions, it's like, of course your emotional is like, yeah, destroy the unions, in an objective world, can people get together and say, oh, this guy is not paying us enough? Think about things all the way down, and you'll find that it's, wow. And that's why, honestly, again, living amongst philosophers makes you feel a little humble about how to react to, mainly, I find it in political things, because they're really hard to unpack. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say, yes, and you have good points, but this is, of course, for you're highly educated, and also this crowd is educated, and you're doctors and stuff like that. But the way the society works, and the technology works, and social media works, with filter bubbles and all the rest, most people won't go and do what you say. Most people will get their filter bubble, will stay in their place, and it's leading society into a bad place, black and white.
Yeah. But one thing I want to, so you become more optimistic. The battle for ideas and the shapes of societies is a battle for very small minorities. It's not a battle for the majority. I mean, the majority are like sheep, unfortunately. They will follow the intellectual trend of the moment. Okay, I don't know if you saw the Google billboards all over the place about the trans project. Have you seen that? The Project Gila for transgender. Let's give everybody. I was wondering, that really the amount of transgender employees at Google justifies putting billboards all over the country that we need to give them a place. So I want you to understand that the reason why that happens, it's because of very few philosophers, in some philosophy department that created some kind of a philosophical theory that then went all the way to critical race, and suddenly Google is spending millions of dollars on, it's not logical. This group here is a condensed group of I would think, highly intellectual people, and it starts like this. I mean, 4 people in a car driving from France back to Russia, change Russia. I don't know, that's the story, right? And
that's my Ocon talk this
that's
year.
Your, okay. He'll tell the story at Ocon. Come to Ocon, by the way, in July. It's a battle for minorities. So forget about the common person in the street shouting BB or whatever. They are following something, like he said. They're in a tribe shouting for their team. They're not the thinkers. The thinkers are going to come from groups like this, highly intellectual, highly educated, and very thoughtful. We're going to come with a philosophical theory, and that's what's going to change. That's what she says, fighting a political battle is like fighting a skirmish with muskets, and fighting the philosophical battle is fighting the nuclear war. And what we're dealing here is the nuclear war. And so let's go deeper, and with groups like that, you can change Israel, by the way, if we're and I think what we're lacking is not the good ideas. We're lacking activism. I mean, people that really take those ideas and do something with them. And I think what we did yesterday, what Boaz is promoting so bravely in Israel, I think is the way you change the culture. It's really, it's like wildfire. When it catches, you can't control it. I mean, it's like people get infected. Now, I don't think Israel or most of today's societies are ready for objectivism. Epistemologically, I don't think they're ready for objectivism, but if we continue to push it, it will catch, hopefully one day.
See, two more things. One is, I wouldn't be so quick to think. I'm very sensitive to the sort of. I think we're all kind of sensitive to the sort of knee-jerk paternalism of government, where the idea is, well, I know how to live, right? We're the smart and the rational ones, but you people, the masses, you're too irrational. You don't know what you're doing. People are irrational, and they have to be commanded. And someone says, you wouldn't do the good on your own, so, we'll have to force you to do it. Of course, I know the good, right? You people, I don't know. And so I bristle at that kind of thing. I don't like that perspective, but I think we can also often take a similar perspective where the masses just read Facebook and Twitter and they don't know it. I don't think that's exactly true. I think there are a lot of people who are more conventional in their thinking, and they're less likely to look outside at ideas that they don't agree with in order to be objective, and they don't have even a notion that even what it looks like to be objective. And so, but I don't think that is a major problem, as you were going to say. You're trying to reach the thoughtful, the intellectually active, and to the extent that you can, try to foster people to be more intellectual, to be more intellectually active, to be more objective, to look around at different perspectives. And the solution can't be regulate big tech because they're controlling our minds and pushing people into bubbles. No, they're not. There's a respect in which what they're doing is giving people, organizing the material, the content around what people tend to click on, what they tend to do, and that has an effect. But it can't be that, then the government needs to step in and dictate how they do it. I know you're not saying that, I was just, yeah, so. Do we need to take a break? Yes. Yeah, that's good. 10 minutes?
Okay, let's take a break.
Oh yeah, let's take a 10-minute break, thanks.